If you've ever thought about or are in the process of investing in a franchise in order to create your generational empire and impact the community in which you live, you don't want to miss a minute of this conversation that Rocky Reidel and I have about reviewing the FDD, his process, and his expertise on the franchise agreement and negotiating tips with the franchisor. He also gives some ideas on how to protect your personal wealth apart from the franchise disclosure document and franchise agreement. So don't miss a minute of this interview. And it's my pleasure to have Rocky Reidel on the Successful Franchisee's Beautiful View. So, Rocky, welcome. And I am so glad to have you and talk with you for other folks to learn about this whole franchising process. But tell me, first of all, how in the world did you get into the franchising?
Thank you, Luke. I'm happy to be here and chat with you. Excited to chat and tell my story and hopefully help your folks. So I started in franchising early on. So I left law school knowing I wanted to do business law. And I had an idea that I was going to be a small business attorney, which there's a need for that. And I still do to some extent. But the hard part is finding clients, right? And what do you do? And about 2 months after I got my bar license, maybe less. Yeah, maybe it was a month and a half or a month or something. After I got my license and I was out the door working, I saw there was a franchise expo in Houston, and I took my last, I don't know, maybe $2,000, maybe it was 1,500, whatever it was, like the last bit left after law school, and I was like, I'm gonna get a booth, and this is make it or break it. I'm gonna hustle and sell my services and help people, or I'm gonna go back and work, I don't know, at the docks. So being there, I met a franchise attorney, and I was basically just there from my angle of a small business attorney, helping people do formations, understand contracts. But the guy next to me or behind me or wherever, the franchise attorney, he and I chatted, we got along, and he basically mentored me for the next few years in learning franchise law. And from that expo, I had clients, and it was not a lot, right? But it was enough to start growing, start learning the ropes, and then, of course, being mentored and taking on some of the stuff that he could feed me. It just was enough to keep the train on the tracks. And from there, you just keep growing and keep learning, keep exploring how to bring value to people. And 10 years later, here I am.
What a
So,
great story. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing that. Hey, so let's say that I refer clients to you and they have their FDD, the franchisor that they're looking at, they're starting their due diligence process. They don't know what questions to ask, but we're getting there
sure.
and educating them.
Yeah.
What is your process to help them through the FDD and franchise agreement?
Excellent. Great question. So our process is very similar, I think, yours, and that's education, right? So the nature of the franchise industry is that it's very structured already. It's very regulated. So even some things that maybe you'd want to change as a franchisee, you're not going to be able to get, not because the franchisor doesn't want to, but because of regulatory reasons, right? There's a whole gambit of reasons, right, out there, from regulatory to just the framework and structure and the nature of franchising, why things happen the way they happen in our industry. So my goal is to make sure that our clients are educated about what they're getting into, right? What that means in particular is understanding the franchise agreement, right? So understanding their legal obligations, understanding their expectations under that agreement, and what they're actually getting, right? What is actually legally binding in that franchise agreement, as opposed to maybe what the sales folks are saying at the franchisor, right? So a franchisee client who understands all of that coming from our office, regardless of whether they pursue the opportunity or not, that's a win for us, right? We're not looking at it, a franchise agreement, to chop it up and change certain things. We're looking to educate our client, and based on that education, our client tells us what they're worried about and what concerns they have, and we find ways to either request some modifications or find some ways to address it maybe outside of the franchise agreement, or counsel them through and help them understand that maybe that boogeyman that they're worried about is not such a boogeyman, right, in the franchise industry. Because there's a lot of things that, even if you've been a business person or business owner and you have done contracts in the past and then you come to a franchise agreement, there's some big things in there that will scare you, right? Liquidated damages, excuse me, personal guarantees, timelines, right? Uh, operations manual compliance that can change, and you don't know what the operations manual actually says until after you sign, right? Until after you're a franchisee, because of confidentiality requirements. But anyways, there's a whole, even if you're sophisticated, coming to franchising, it can be scary. And so we help our clients understand all of that, right? And it's not necessarily that they need to make a buy or not, whether they sign or not. It's making sure that they have the details necessary to make a business decision, right? And the business decision is on them, right? We don't know your local market. We won't know the specific franchise vertical that you're in. Like, I don't know the healthcare space. I know franchising, and I know franchising in the healthcare space, but I don't know healthcare, for example. Um, but my goal is to give them the education in the franchise sector so that they can put it into their equation and make that business decision.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what are the work products that clients can expect
Yes.
working with you?
Excellent. Yeah. So when they sign up, they get immediate access to our courses. So right now, currently, we have a course on negotiating with your franchisor, and that walks you through how to craft a request to the franchisor and the things that give you leverage, right, so to speak, the touch points, the pressure points that you want to make in those negotiations, and just giving you some workflows and some ideas on how to do that. It also has a negotiation chatbot that I've created so that you can role play with yourself or with the chatbot to actually create that request and then actually try to negotiate that request with a franchisor. And it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. It's pretty challenging. So they get immediate access to that. Then my team, we start reviewing the FDD, reviewing the franchise agreement. Excuse me. And what we do is we draft a summary review letter. Now, the summary review letter is it's not legalese. This is very, very conversational. This is me telling you my thoughts. And I will put citations in there. So you're going to get specific citations on the section that I'm talking about. But you're going to get comments like, hey, this system looks like it's very sales heavy. If you don't have a sales background, you're going to want to get a sales background, right? Or you're going to want to go above and beyond and learn sales, because the franchisor may bring you leads, but the franchisor does not close those leads. That's what you do, right? And that's a comment that I make, and sometimes that's a factor for the decision. Like if it's an engineer who doesn't do sales, right? Something like that. So it's conversational. It's pointing out important things that you need to know. And it's explaining things in the franchise agreement that you may not understand, things like liquidated damages, mandatory minimums, performance requirements, personal guarantees, non-competes, right? All the big stuff, and even some little stuff in there too. I just explain it to you very layman, just like we're sitting at a coffee shop or something talking, right? And then I send that to you. That's one deliverable you get customized, right? That's after we read your review, or your FDD rather. You get that review. And then the other course is the FDD companion course. So once you get the summary review letter, embedded in my comments are links to our companion course with videos that explain it a little deeper. So if reading it doesn't make sense, even though I try to do it just plain English, then go to the video. You can watch me explain it to you on video, and usually that gets us to the goal line, right, of making sure you got it. But if there's still things that worry you, then we also talk about it later. So once you have all that and the franchisee reviews it and understands it, then we schedule a conference call and we get on the phone. We talk through, really, I give them the floor first. I say, hey, tell me what you're worried about. What concerns you? What do you see that scares you? Tell me those things and let's talk through it. And they tell me what worries them, right? What their biggest concerns are. And we find ways to either address it or submit questions to the franchisor, or submit a request, or potentially talk about ways to address it outside of the franchise agreement. So that takes us up to then the franchisee is in a position to negotiate the terms with the franchisor, right? We don't take lead in that because, frankly, I think my clients get better deals when they're dealing with salespeople as opposed to lawyers in the room. So I like that, but we're always behind the scenes. So if they have a conversation that they're not confident about, or they have questions, or they want to strategize another approach or something, they can always schedule another follow-up call. We can chat with them and walk through it. And yeah, then I guess the last deliverable there is the amendment, right? The addendum. Almost always that's handled by the franchisor's attorney. Then they send it to the client, and I tell the client, send it to us so we can make sure it's clear, that there's no confusion. Usually it captures everything correctly, but sometimes every so often it's a little unclear to me, and I just want to make sure it's tight, right? Let's get it tightened up, because hey, in 10 years on renewal, you're not probably going to be dealing with the same person, maybe. Right? So
Right.
yeah, so that is the journey in regards to the deliverables and what you get and what we do.
You mentioned a couple of times in there about mitigating certain aspects of the franchise agreement outside of the agreement. What does that look like for a client that's just starting a new business in franchising?
Absolutely. So it can mean, depending on what the issue is, right? It can mean a lot of things, but typically that's things like forming entities, doing some estate planning or wealth and asset protection planning outside of the franchise agreement, right? So even though you're signing a personal guarantee, you still have the ability to manage your assets and manage your wealth. And doing nothing is risky, right? Doing nothing and just leaving it all out there is risky when you sign a personal guarantee. But if you sign a personal guarantee and you manage your assets in the right way, whether that's, maybe putting a portion in trust or expanding your homestead, right? That's a great opportunity to lock in wealth that's not, reachable by creditors in most states. Um, or looking at asset protection plans. Maybe that's, having, if you go on vacation to Mexico often, maybe go open a bank account there, right? Make it, have some liquidity that's outside of the U.S. jurisdiction. So it's a lot of different things, but those are some of the more common ones. Other things like maybe labor concerns that we try to address beforehand, like making sure you have an adequate staffing availability. Some places you're not going to be able to staff certain things, right? Certain personnel, if you're really specialized. It's like some of the trades or even the education, right? There's some education franchises that require certain certifications. And if the franchisee is not going to get those certifications themselves, are they even going to be able to hire people that have that qualification in their state or their region or something? So things like that. It's thinking through a little bit deeper beyond the legal obligations, I guess, and thinking about the things that are things that affect our clients in the franchise agreement. How can we mitigate that outside, right? So we brainstorm it sometimes, but most often it's dealing with what personal wealth and assets. Labor comes up. Sometimes there's regulatory issues in certain sectors, but it varies, right? So I don't know. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, Typically in a franchisor's process of due diligence, and every franchisor is a little bit different on
Yeah,
when
yeah,
they send out the FDD. At what point in
sure.
the process do you suggest clients get involved with you and send you the FDD?
Sure. Well, I'm a bit flexible. Definitely before you sign the franchise agreement, that's necessary. but honestly, we can start as early or later in the process. It's not a major concern to me. I think it makes sense that I'm at somewhere in the middle as opposed to maybe too early or even too late, because you don't want me to come in too early when you pay me to look at the review, and then you find out something about their culture or something about the way they do business that you don't like, and then you don't want to pursue that opportunity, right? So I would suggest they've done enough due diligence where this opportunity makes sense and they do want to pursue it. They're enthusiastic about it, and now they need to understand the legal obligations. I think that's a very good fit, is right there in the middle. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I mean, our timeline is fairly fast for doing franchise agreement reviews within 5 business days. Um, but you don't want to probably be under a deadline from the franchisor. I mean, I just got one, I guess yesterday or maybe Sunday even. Got, the franchisee submitted and said, well, the franchisor gave us 7 days to sign. And I'm like, well, okay. First of all, these guys are coming off the used car sales lot. First of all, coming to sell you franchises. So just pump the brakes a little. It's okay if we're a little behind and we're in the process of due diligence. We will do it fast. We will do it correctly and within the time we need. But don't get bogged down into the sales pressure, right, of those timelines. So I don't recommend that you're under the gun with that timeline, but I also don't recommend that you do it so early that you're not bought in to the concept, right? That you don't see that it is a fit. So hopefully that makes sense. But
Sure.
yeah, so.
Yeah. What are some of the more common misconceptions that clients come to you and talk about that you're educating them with?
Oh, there's quite a few. One that's recently come up was, and this comes up fairly often, maybe once a month or every other month. The idea, and I don't usually talk about it very much because we put notes on this in our summary review letter, right, and in our videos. But this was, I guess, a pre-client call, and it is where the franchisee believes that just having an entity, having an LLC or a corporation, protects them from personal liability, even though they've signed the personal guarantee, right? So that's a misconception that if you're not familiar with contracts and the way things kind of work in the legal world, it's easy to make because you hear online, you hear on TV, just form an entity and it protects you from liability, right? It does, but not when you sign an agreement that gives them the runaround, right? So that's one of them. Definitely the sales pressures, when I hear all the time. It's like, oh, we got to sign in 14 days, which is that's not correct, right? The 14-day is a waiting period. It's not, that's the soonest you could sign it. It's not the day that you have to sign. Or they give them some arbitrary date, right? And it's like, look, I get they're salespeople, it's fine, but we can, we'll get our work done the right way. We're not going to rush through it. That's a big one. Trying to think, what are some others that pop up often? I guess some of the ones that are maybe folks who haven't done a lot of their homework or maybe aren't using a consultant or an advisor like yourself is that they put prospective franchisees think that they can exit the agreement, at any time, or if it doesn't work out, or they think that the franchisor is obligated to give them certain services that they're being sold and promised. That's actually kind of a fairly common comment in our reviews. The franchisor may tell you that they're going to run the call center, they're going to give you leads, they're going to do some marketing and this and that, but very often none of that is actually in the franchise agreement. They're not obligated to do it. They're doing it because they know it will make money and it is successful. But at any moment, they can flip that switch and turn it off. And you don't have recourse as a franchisee because that's not a legal obligation that the franchisor has to you. So those are some of the more common ones. But yeah, I mean, we touch on a lot of that, a lot of little stuff too. Like the operations manual can change, right? Whatever you're buying into now, it's going to evolve 100%. And you may not like where it's going to evolve, but you still got to evolve, right? You still got to adapt. It's a big one. I mean, back in the day, McDonald's didn't do breakfast. And there was a lot of hesitation and resistance when they added breakfast, I guess 80s or 90s or something, way back in the day. It was a while back. Because when you think about it from franchisee perspective, now I have to pay a whole new shift. And does anybody even know to come get breakfast at McDonald's at the time? No. But now that's a huge revenue driver for franchisees, right? It's a whole new, revenue line. So things like that. And that causes friction between franchisees and franchisors. When it works well, that friction dies. If it doesn't work well, that friction can simmer and fester and cause problems in the future. But little things like that are the kind of misconceptions and the obligations and responsibilities that we point out and educate our clients on.
Okay. Outstanding. Thank you. And it's been over 10 years since you went to that expo in Houston.
Yep. Yep.
What trends are you seeing in the franchise industry that are impactful for clients, for those getting into it?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There's been a number of changes in recent years. The industry has been adapting to different formats in regards to clarifying and trying to improve transparency in FDDs. Some are doing that better than others, and that's not necessarily the FTC rule yet. There are some changes coming down the pike from the FTC, but organizations like the North American, I forget their full acronyms, securities something something NASA is what we call it in the industry, but they are releasing ongoing guidance and industry requirements for franchising, right, and for franchise documents. So improving that, making it clearer, and trying to get the information in a very succinct and legible and understandable way. I think we're moving in the right direction on that. There's some speculation on what the FTC will do, but we don't know yet. But I'm hopeful that it will help bring us some clarity around some gray areas in the FDD. So that's some changes, like from a regulatory perspective. In regards to operational, everything's moving a lot faster, I think, in the industry than it did 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, we were still getting paper FDDs at some points, right? And we were still filing paper FDDs. When the first couple of franchisors I represented, it would be an all-day thing at Kinko's doing FDD printing and collection and then shipping it off to the state regulators. That doesn't happen anymore, which is awesome for me, right? So things are moving faster. I think also on the sales side, the operations side, franchisors are much more responsive and fast, getting information to prospective franchisees quicker. I think there's also an expectation of franchisees to get information quicker and then to make decisions quicker. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but I think the availability of information and the ability to do research anywhere, right, on our couch at home, to research a company and understand just about everything about it, has made a lot of the sales cycle easier and quicker. I mean, I like that, being able to have a lot of information. There are some gaps, I think, in regards to the industry and how we can do things better. So I see that as being a big change. I would say also the rise of consultants and advisors in franchise sales and in franchise vetting, that has grown a lot in just 10 years. 10 years, it was not typical that I would have too many consultants come chat with me, or brokers or advisors, whichever title they take. And it's just slowly increased. And now it's probably half of the franchisees we represent, maybe more. Yeah, some months it's definitely more, come directly from consultants, and then others come just by themselves still. But that's changing. I think potential investors, potential franchisees are seeing the value that consultants bring. They're seeing um, they're seeing that they're able to do a lot more vetting, and they're able to do a lot more research and get a lot more advice and counsel going through consultants as opposed to doing it on their own. So that has definitely changed in 10 years. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it too. I mean, some of those
Well,
changes. Yeah.
I've been around since 1998 in franchising, so I've seen a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've seen a
and
lot too.
you
Yeah.
mentioned the positives of a new business owner working with a consultant through the process. What are some of the downsides of working with a consultant?
Um, yeah, so there's the downsides. I don't have particular experience on the downsides. Like I haven't seen a consultant that I've worked with really like implode or anything or cause big problems. But I think in general, sometimes some consultants would have a narrow, maybe portfolio, right? Or look at view into the industry. Now, I know there's a lot of really good consultants and advisors who, even though they have their portfolio, they're always willing to help their client approach a franchisor who's maybe not on their portfolio. And the franchisors are open to that. Very often they still get deals done, right? It's just not in their formal program, right? It's not in their portfolio. So I know that's somewhat of a downside, but um, the brokers uh, who go above and beyond, it's not a downside, right? Because they're going to help you find the right fit, maybe even if it's outside their portfolio. Um, I think sometimes the downside also would be that consultants uh, may focus on certain demographics or industries that may not be a fit for the client. And again, that's something that I don't usually see because the clients are usually looking for specific insights and industry expertise. So that type of specialization is a good thing. But otherwise, I mean, consultants are people, right? There's good people, there's bad people, right? And the more salesy folks that end up in consulting typically burn out faster because it's not sustainable and they're not placing good candidates in the right fit, right? In the right system. And franchisors find out. They know that because now they have to deal with a bad franchisee, a bad fit, because that broker, that consultant, um, recommended the wrong fit. So I don't know. Those are a few of the downsides, but frankly, from a prospective franchisee position, there's not really a lot of downside there. You're getting counseling, you're getting some advice. Now, it should not be your only advice. I think it should not be your only counsel, and you do have to verify things on your own and just make sure that everything matches up. Um, but being able to have extra eyes, extra hands, it helps a lot. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And from your perspective, what are the differences between one of my clients working with an emerging brand with, say, less than 30 units already sold, as opposed to a mature brand of 70 or more units that they have
Sure.
placed?
Yeah, yeah, definitely there's big differences. So, I mean, the first is the availability of information, right? Emerging brands, smaller brands, depending on how soon they've emerged, right, or where they're at in the process, we may have very, very little information in the FDD. And that's a bit of a handicap, right? It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but we have to caution our clients, say, look, this is emerging. There's the downside is that they may not be fully developed. Their system may not be proven in markets that you're interested in. Now, the upside to an emerging brand is they're probably more flexible on the agreement, right? We probably have a little bit more leverage in negotiating certain things to make sure that this would be the right fit in your market. So there's some give and take there with emerging brands, but the biggest hurdle is definitely information. Is we can't get insight into where they're operating, right? The how their units have fared over time and in certain locations and what competitors are doing, things like that. There's just a gap because it's so early. Um, Now, on the flip side, the established brands, you can usually get a lot of good information, right? They're established. Frankly, if they've got more than 70 units, they're probably well developed and they have a team that is dedicated to franchise development and franchise improvement, meaning not just sales, but also making sure that the units are operating optimally, right?
Right.
Running the right way and doing the right things, which is very important. Very, very important, not just for you, but for the whole system, right? Because once a couple of units get a bad reputation, that spreads, especially with the day of the internet. It's like wildfire, right? Stuff goes viral and it can crush you. Um, so yeah, so you can get more data with established brands. That's the upside. Definitely with established brands and units and things like that, you can talk to more existing franchisees and see what their journey is. The downside, obviously, is they're much less likely to make any changes to the franchise agreement or any substantial changes. Now, even with even with established brands, sometimes we can modify the timeline, right? Opening timeline, if maybe you're coming from corporate, you want to take a sabbatical or something, maybe we can extend that opening timeline or, um, work out a training. If you feel like you don't need to send so many people to training or something, maybe you can become a qualified trainer for your own staff or whatever, depending on the system, depending on specifics, little things like that. It's not cutting to the franchisor's rights, right, or the fundamental elements of the franchise system, but it's a few things that will make it easier for, right, the client, for the prospective client, and hopefully will help just get them in the black sooner, right? That's the goal. You want to make sure they're successful. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell the differences in the way that we kind of approach emerging versus established.
You and I could talk about franchising all day long.
Oh yeah,
We
I'm
do
sure.
we do have a set amount of time here for folks to keep their attention. So what haven't I asked you that's specific to clients that are just getting into franchising right now? What haven't I asked you that I should, that folks should know?
Huh. Well, I would say take your time. I guess I'll just be general. Like the type of advice that I would give clients or prospective clients coming to us who have never done this before, take your time, right? Do your due diligence, understand it, get people involved who can advise you, consultants, attorneys, maybe even accountants or something to understand it. And just, you're going to have a gut feeling, and that's okay. It's good to have gut feelings, but make sure your brain and your gut are aligned, right? Because even though your gut may say, let's do it, but then your brain looks at the numbers and it's like, wait a minute, there's something not right. Just, I would have I don't know how I would put it. I guess a symbiotic approach to it. Just understand all of it. Make sure that your gut and your brain understand it. Make sure they're in agreement, and pursue that. Right. That's what I would say. I guess putting it in very simple terms. Because when I see folks who struggle, or when I see systems that struggle, there's usually some disconnect between what the franchisee either expected or understood. They were miseducated or they had the wrong expectations versus what the franchisor's expectations of franchisees are and what they offer, and what their roles and responsibilities are. So it's really, I guess, as simple as that. That's the key, is understanding the roles, the responsibilities, and the expectations of both sides of the transaction, the franchisor and the franchisee. And it just takes time. It takes conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions of the franchisor, even if we know that it's likely to be rejected, or a request or something. I say, look, ask it, ask a question, and see how they answer. Even if they reject the response, maybe the way they answer is more important than the answer itself, right? If they blow you off and they have, they put you, not put you down, I guess, but if they blow you off and they don't take your concerns seriously, that's much, much more of a red flag than them saying, look, this is why we have it. This is why we can't change it. Right. Right. So I don't know. Those are just a few maybe gems there for you. So
No, that's fantastic. Rocky, thank you so much for your time today and educating and I'm looking forward to working with you on down the line. And thank you all for
same.
watching
Yes, sir.
this episode of the Successful Franchisee's Beautiful View. Stay safe and win every day.
Thank you, Luke.